She comes up to me and she goes, "Dad, your outfit eats." And I was like,
What?
"What did you just say?" And she said, "It eats." And I was like, "What does that even mean?" And she's like, "That means it's good." And I'm like, "Okay,
Yeah,
that's different."
Jesse, I hope you know we're not stressed, so you don't need to be.
I don't even know if he can hear us.
Can
Yeah,
y'all
just
hear me
Jesse.
now?
Yeah,
I
I
can
can
hear
hear
you.
you.
Okay, you do hear me.
I should tell Jesse, we've never had any technical difficulties, so this is a
No,
first
never.
for us. Did you have any problems with his list of questions that he sent us? I'm messing with you.
What a jerk.
All right, fellas, I think I'm with you. And
Did you hear that prank? I just pulled on him.
that right there is going to make the extras for sure. That's hilarious.
Perfect.
That'll be one of those funny laughs right there at the beginning or the end of this conversation.
You're like,
Hello and welcome to the Durham Talents channel. My name is Jesse Durham. I've really been looking forward to this first interview in 2026 from private conversations I've been having in 2025 with Nate Dean and Brandon Goswick. These guys have a really cool origin story with infinite banking that I want to share with you here today. They are professionals in the infinite banking space, authorized NNI, IBC practitioners. We've been having those ongoing conversations. I wanted to be able to share some of those. So we're going to facilitate this conversation, capture their story, and I hope that you enjoy. So fellas, that was really quick, but it's on top of Brandon and I, okay, just to give more of the background, Brandon and I have actually got to meet in person live. We met at a coaching academy that the Nelson Nash Institute put on. That was really cool. We got to spend some time at the same table, working through some professional aspects of this business, building this business, working with clients, do what I like to say is, live and leave a lasting legacy through infinite banking. So we've got to meet face to face. That was cool. I knew I wanted to have more conversations with you, Brandon. From then, you were gracious. We got in each other's calendars. We've spent some time one-on-one on the phone. And we decided to be able to share your story. I wanted to be able to share your story with my clients. And I want you guys to be able to share this wherever folks need to hear y'all's story. I've enjoyed it. And then here recently, me and Nate got on the phone. And cool enough, me and one of his sons even got to spend a couple of hours recently on the phone talking about business and life. And so it's been cool. The individual time we've had is what I'm saying and trying to describe. But I want folks to directly hear from you guys because I've been intentionally deciding to spend more time with people that are really like-minded, but also have a unique perspective. And I do believe that iron sharpens iron, so that's what we're here to do today. I'll let you guys give anything more of an introduction. Let folks know, who you are, where you come from, how you'd like to do that. Let me kick it over to you guys. Brandon, do you want to start us off?
sure. So you can tell I come from somewhere in the country because you see no neighbors beside me. Actually, the only neighbors that we have are across the pasture, as we call it. We live in a little bitty East Texas town called Elysian Fields. It's where Nate and I grew up, became friends at a very young junior high age, and been friends and now business partners ever since. And I would not be able to do any of this without the Lord's love and grace and mercy and patience on me and my life, and also a wife who I've been married to getting close to 20 years now, and we have 4 children together. And she's been on this journey the whole time. So that's a little bit about us. Competitive by nature, love sports, love competing in general, but also love the idea of iron sharpening iron. And that's a little bit more about me.
Yeah, and it's that rounded background, of course, that appeals to me beyond IBC. Is being a husband myself. We're close to 20 years ourselves. We celebrated 18 years married, and these are things that we've been talking about. But I'm just saying for everybody, and recently had our fourth child, and I'm like, man, if I can pick up some things from Nate and Brandon in this area of fatherhood, or in this area of marriage, or in this area of IBC, these are the kinds of conversations I want to have. So appreciate that. How about you, Nate?
Yeah, so Brandon said we grew up together. Up until 2008, me and my family we were all living in the same town where Brandon is. But in 2008, we moved south about 3 hours to the Beaumont, Texas area. And so I've been in Southeast Texas since 2008. But, just had this really awesome opportunity with learning about IBC back in 2017, then 2018, me and Brandon starting our company, Unlimited Life Concepts, together. And when I tell people about our journey, the thing that always is at the front of the conversation is I have gotten to spend more time with my wife and kids in the last 8 years than I ever thought possible.
Mm.
And man, I'm so grateful for that.
That is, or can be, both the blessing and the curse of entrepreneurship or business or self employment, isn't it? Okay, that's awesome. That's an aspect worth noting, and it's something, again, that's another one of those intentional aspects of my life that I've known since I was exposed to entrepreneurship in 2015. That was the venue, that was the way that I was going to be able to accomplish the kind of time that I wanted with my family, even though it has its ups and its downs. And, I'm sure we'll talk about that in our conversation. But because you expressed that, I wanted to say, yeah, these are just more of the reasons why I wanted to be able to have conversations with you guys. So y'all are used to talking together. I'll let y'all do what you want, how you want. But I do like knowing a bit about your mindset, your background, your thinking. What did life look like before IBC? You describe that how you want, and then of course I really want to know about, well, what did it look like getting exposed to infinite banking? How did that happen? What went on in between your ears as you're seeing this or hearing this or whatever that looked like? And then I'll ask some questions moving forward. But y'all take turns or however you want. Life before, and then what did IBC look like being exposed to you?
Life before IBC, there was a juncture where Nate and I reconnected in our adult lives around 2017. Life takes you different paths and places. And he came back through town and said, "Hey, let's connect." And we visited while I was working as a middle school principal there in the town that we still live in. And before IBC, I would say that we were fairly confident on what we were doing, which was pretty much consistently Dave Ramsey, as far as paying off as much debt as we could, as fast as we could. I mean, we were following the baby steps as religiously as possible. I taught the classes, all those things. And my wife and I were on board with that, but the B word and DR were not the words that she looked forward to hearing, budget and Dave Ramsey in our house after many, many years, because we had pretty much stopped everything to pay off student loan debt. And we have no regret of that at all. The discipline was very beneficial. But when Nate and I reconnected, I was probably at a place where I felt like I was headed in the right direction. And it's hard to answer that question now. It's hard to go back and really remember what you were thinking. But I do remember thinking some of these things. I wonder how I'm ever going to retire. I wonder if I'm going to be able to retire. And I'm not sure if I can retire. So therefore, I'll probably just do what I do right now and just try to work up the ladder, the best I can in the position and the profession I was in, which was education. And in a small town, there's only about 3 ladders you can take as far as stepwise, and that's teacher to coach, teacher slash administrator, and then superintendent. And so I'd already been working towards all that. And then thank goodness the Lord saw fit to reconnect Nate and I's path. And I'll pass it over to him to just kind of talk through where he was before IBC as well.
Yeah. So for anybody who is a Dave Ramsey follower, I like to say there is hope for you, because we were both hardcore. I mean, Brandon was hardcore, I was hardcore. To give you an idea of how hardcore I was, from '03 to '08, I was running a retail website and was also in charge of shipping and everything like that. And so I spent a lot of time in my office at that time. And so much time in my office that I put a TV in there. I put a DVR, which back in that time it was called TiVo. And so I had a TiVo in my office, and my TiVo was filled with Dave Ramsey, Fox Business, radio episodes because he had a show on Fox Business, and I would TiVo every episode of Dave Ramsey, and I would listen to what he said. And then in 2010, when my wife and I got ready to buy our next house, the way we were able to afford that was to buckle down and do the rice and beans thing for a little while. Just made a lot of sacrifices. And so we purchased our house in 2011. And like Brandon said, up to that point, we thought we were doing the absolute best thing that we could do because we were operating with the best summation of our thinking at that time. And my epiphany epiphany moment came in 2016 before me and Brandon had reconnected. I was riding in a vehicle with a successful business owner and real estate owner, and real estate investor. And the radio comes on, and it's Dave Ramsey. And I get so excited because I'm like, this guy's way more successful than I am. And he's listening to Dave Ramsey. So I must be doing something right. And so I open my mouth and I go, "Oh, you listen to Dave Ramsey too?" You know? And I started telling him about all the things we had done or whatever. And he said, "Yeah, he's good for entertainment, but I don't necessarily agree with everything he does." And he started telling me about good debt and bad debt. That was the first thing I'd ever heard about good debt and bad debt.
Mm.
And I don't know if he told me, I can't remember if he told me to go read Rich Dad Poor Dad or it just sent me on that journey to where I came across that book very quickly. But Rich Dad Poor Dad, reading that book first before I ever discovered Becoming Your Own Banker was what prepared me for becoming your own banker. Because had I not read Rich Dad Poor Dad, I don't think I would have been ready for becoming your own banker. But coming across Becoming Your Own Banker in 2017, it did not take me long from reading that where things started clicking and connecting very quickly for me. Um, Brandon was not exposed to Rich Dad Poor Dad at that point, so it took him a little bit longer. Once he finally read Becoming Your Own Banker, it took him a little bit longer to process everything. But he and I were having constant conversations back and forth because I read Becoming Your Own Banker, and me and Brandon had the relationship we had at that point where we were reading books together. We were in accountability with one another. And so when I shared Becoming Your Own Banker with him, he's like, "What's this about?" And I said, "Just read it and tell me what you think about it." Like, I can't even fully explain what it's about yet, but there was this weird level of excitement that I couldn't explain. And so like I said, it took Brandon a little bit longer to process, but eventually he kind of came around to if this is real, this is crazy. And we were both on the same page with that. Like, if this is real, this is crazy. So we started doing some research, find out that, oh, people really are doing this, people are having success with it. And then that led us to a podcast by these two guys, Mike Everett and Chris Bay out of Kansas. They had a podcast called, and still do, called Life Success and Legacy. And we start listening to their podcast, and very quickly, it was like the Lord just led us there. It
Mm.
wasn't like, it was obvious that the Lord led us to that podcast because their conversations we were drawn to, their stories were very similar to me and Brandon. There was a lot of alignment. They were both followers of Christ, which was something that was really important for us. And they were just matter of fact in their conversation. They were There was no hype in what they were talking about. It was just like, this is what it is, this is what it's not, kind of thing. And we were
Mm.
really drawn to that. So we reach out to them and say, essentially, we're these two knuckleheads from Texas who have read Becoming Your Own Banker, and we need to know what to do next.
Yep. Yeah. And then at that time, Jesse, to kind of go back, and I'm finding, so we have some newer members that have been dear friends of ours for a long time, and the husband and the wife are both on board completely in the conversation and the engagement. Not that every husband and wife are going to interact the same, but in their season of life they are. And I'm finding that 95% of our conversations are man focused. Well, although that's phenomenal, what I'm also finding is when our wives start talking about IBC, it opens up these new conversations I've never even thought about because I don't think like wives think, obviously, and neither do we. And so as I've heard them discussing these things, and we've talked about IBC and becoming your own banker, you know, my wife needs more credit than anybody on this whole deal because I came to my wife and I not only said, hey, I want to go start doing something that Dave Ramsey is adamantly against. Not only that, but I want to start a business with my business partner, Nate, my buddy, who she did not know well at any capacity, even though we grew up together. And I want to create the potential to leave the current job I'm in, which in our little bitty town is one of the safest jobs you can have. And so I call her my closer now, and I don't mean that in the traditional sense at all. What I mean is when families are engaged and interested in learning what we do, like Nate said, there's no magic. It's not hyperbolic. It's just a better environment for us to think through how our money flows to and through. When the wife comes over and visits with my wife, that's all it takes. I can talk for hours and hours and hours or answer questions for hours and hours to the husband. But when the wife goes, oh, that's simple, that makes sense, then we're off to the races. And so what our mentors, I'm circling around here, what our mentors did a phenomenal job at coaching us up in, and they're still dear friends of ours and mentors, is you can't compartmentalize this. It is all a part of everything we do. You know, it's not something that we just practice this over here and then we think this way over here. It becomes a life process and a lifestyle conversation. And so anytime anybody says, hey, you want to talk about IBC? Nate and I are like, we talk about IBC for free. Why wouldn't we want to hit record and save it to remember what we learned and, kind of time stamping it.
Absolutely. So let me make sure I want to ask a few things. I'm writing down notes furiously here. So you guys, buddies, you'll call each other up or you'll message or whatever. Y'all were having book conversations. You were having, hey, we're doing this in the Dave Ramsey baby steps conversation. Like y'all were having conversations about personal finance and growth, or I don't know how you would have described it necessarily at the time, but that was all going on before infinite banking, before rich dad, poor dad, good debt versus bad debt. I think that's such a valuable thing. Again, in more ways than personal development or personal finance. It's so good for fellas. I had a prospective client. We're on the verge of formalizing a plan, going into application. We've had multiple conversations. He's followed my content for a while. And, $250,000 cash flow in his business, doing well for himself, right? But he messaged me the other day saying, hey, I just was reading this, Nelson's second book, and Building Your Warehouse of Wealth, which I don't think gets enough credit.
I agree.
If people are hearing that for the first time, jump in Nelson Nash's second book. But he said, man, Jesse, I need more conversations like this. I need more people like you in my life where we can talk about family, marriage, personal finance, like all this other kind of stuff, and not have it compartmentalized. I love having conversations with other fellas and ladies where it's just all on the table. We can talk about all this stuff because we're all intentionally wanting to move these fronts forward. So I like that, and I just wanted to underscore that and make sure I was hearing you right there. All right. Some of y'all's timelines are a bit different, but you were both on the Dave Ramsey plan or approach. I know what it's like, Brandon, to come from a small town. My background is I've worked at the sheriff's office in my town. I've taught at the high school, because there's only one, the high school in my county, okay? It's Polk County High School, North Carolina. From a small town, 2 stoplights. So I remember, just really connecting you on there, what kind of a leap that meant for you to go to your wife and say, hey, I'm looking at this, which is not only, so very different from in general, this very set concrete career of, it's 30 years and you know what that looks like. And there are these retirement plans and all this other kind of stuff. So I want to dig in more there. I also wanted to ask more about, like I've even made these notes on the side, guys, here about, man, I need to talk. And if y'all are willing, I'll go ahead and say it now. Y'all need to be in on round table conversations with me where we can tackle these other things that I've wrote to the side about. Well, what about Dave Ramsey's, 15 versus 30-year mortgage idea? What about, student loans and what that's like for folks and how that, pulls in IBC in a big way, possibly if they choose for it too. And I love what you said, Nate, about there's always hope for Dave Ramsey people. I feel like I give credit to him every chance that I get. I love reading his books. I love how he talks about generous giving. I love how he talks about and how he's built family business. I mean, I know it's a brand and he's got personalities and other stuff, but he's got children that work in his business. Like, I admire so much about what he does. Feel very strongly, with good reason, very differently on some subjects that you guys are obviously aware of and you're going to speak to. But I am planting that seed now. We should be having roundtable discussions in the future. We need to put our calendars together.
Let's do it.
Tell me more about, Brendan, tell me more about how, because you're entrenched, man. If you're teaching financial peace, it's a different level, right? You're not just drinking the Kool-Aid and following the plan. You're entrenched, man. Tell me more about that. Tell me more about that pivot. I don't care if it's, in your own mind or more conversations with your wife. It's one area that I know I'd like you to go deeper.
Well, I'm going to circle back to something you underscored to connect it to that question, because I really like a point you brought up. And you'll find Nate and I always circle back around to how wise Nelson was and how becoming your own banker and the principles in it work for life in general. Thinking long range, not being afraid to put energy and effort. Don't be afraid to capitalize on things that matter, rethinking your thinking. So when Nelson says, once we know what the problem is, it's a very simple solution. Really, it's not complicated. It's just hard to change because we have to overcome what we thought we knew was true. That's either half true or not true. And so as we remember that, I want to touch on one piece first. I got fully convicted and broken down to get right with the Lord first before any of this happened. All right. And I won't go into great detail here, but I can't mention all of this, all these things that are blessings that we love to do without that, because without that, this probably is not even in the conversation. So Nate and I had reconnected for accountability because there was none consistently beyond just showing up at church, once or twice a week. And so we're reading together, reading books together, brainstorming on books. Hey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? We actually started holding each other accountable for what time we got up in the morning. And yes, we believe that what time we get up in the morning matters. Do we nail it all the time? No, we're flawed and always growing and learning and failing. So keep all of that in mind when you're hearing our story, to know that it's the Lord first and foremost. You'll hear us say often, OG, only God. And so all glory goes to him. And in that journey, my wife and I, Leah and I, had already paid off on very, very average salaries, 100K or less total, over 100K in student loan debt in 46 months. So we followed Dave Ramsey as far as the baby steps, and I would not trade or not any of that at all. I like to be very clear on that as well. And Nate and I is kind of part of our banner because he was blocked on Twitter by Dave Ramsey. And, some things you say, really draw people's attention of, well, why would that be? So the piece about being in your small town and doing something different, hindsight, it was no different than being in one of the leadership positions in a small town. It just took longer to catch up because I'm doing something different now after 8 years. But eyes are always going to be on you when you're doing something different or that only a few people do. And if I could go back and coach up myself, I would just say, hey, get real clear on why you believe that this concept, infinite banking and becoming your own banker, is true. You will Nothing will return void on learning and understanding and implementing that in your own life and in your family's life. And then it will allow a lot of the noise to be easily uh, disregarded. And early on, most people think when you go into the world of insurance, because that's what whole life insurance is and becoming your own banker, they think you're becoming an insurance agent. And it's hard to separate those two because yes, Nate and I and Jesse, we are insurance agents per the practical how do you become qualified to teach this. But Nate and I did not, we weren't insurance agents that learned about IBC. We learned about IBC and becoming your own banker. We're like, this is so logical and so beneficial to what we've been doing to now what we're going to do. Why wouldn't we want to share with others and provide for our family? And so that's been a big shift. So, uh, Nate, go ahead.
Yeah, let me just to what Brandon just said. Technically, I was an insurance agent at the time.
Oh, yeah, yeah. My bad, Nate.
So I have a ministry background, but having four kids, you know, a lot of times, especially working in small churches, that's not going to feed your family. And so I've been bivocational for many years. So I would work in church, but then I would also do something to be able to provide for my family. And so I was working in a local uh, property and casualty agency. I was actually the manager of that agency. So home and auto insurance for the layperson. So even though I was technically an insurance agent, I didn't know anything about life insurance whatsoever until I started learning about infinite banking.
Hmm.
Because our sole focus in our agency was just home and auto insurance. We didn't sell life insurance, or I mean, we could sell life insurance, but that wasn't a priority. It wasn't what we were focused on. So technically, I was an insurance agent, just not the life agent type. But Brandon likes to. Well, first off, I'm a quick start. If anybody knows about the Colbier index, and what Brandon, the way he describes that to people is like I'll see a pool in the distance and I'll take off running to go jump in before I even know if there's water in there. Um,
He'll
so
probably jump off the diving board and get as high as he can with full of energy before he looks to see if there's water.
for me, learning about IBC and the way I operate, man, I wanted to go yesterday. Like I was itching
Mm,
to get started and everything like that. And the beauty of this partnership that God ordained for us is that I might be the gas, but Brandon is the brake, and a car has to have both to stay on the road.
mm, yep.
And so, but we've also rubbed off on each other quite a bit over the years,
Mhm.
where there have been times where I've pumped the brake on Brandon, you know, and there's been times where Brandon said, "Let's go," where I wasn't ready to go, and so we complement each other really well, really well. If I think about it too much, I'll get choked up, so I'm gonna get off of that subject real quick. Um, but thinking back on where we were in our journey, because Brandon talked about how much debt he paid off and everything like that. We were actually coming at this from very different places because where Brandon had been really successful following Dave and getting out of debt and everything like that. We had been successful at times, but unfortunately, through some of our own decisions and then also some life that just happened that we couldn't control, we had found ourselves in a very different place, my wife and I, where we were paycheck to paycheck and there was not much left over because our dollars have been spread so thin through payments on things that were financed. And so Brandon came in way ahead of me in terms of where he was financially, but at the same time, him implementing IBC on his side and me implementing IBC on my side, we both immediately started seeing the value of what that was going to look like. And for people who don't understand what Nelson talks about when he's saying shifting the wind current, what that effectively means is you have the ability to take action on really refinancing debt away from the bank, where the bank controls the terms, the bank's benefiting from the interest, bringing that into your own system to where now you control the cash flow. And, ultimately, long term, you're going to benefit from the interest. And so we were able to shift wind current on debt very quickly that started freeing up dollars. And that was huge for us. And coming from the standpoint of being in ministry, we didn't have a lot to start with. Looking back on it now, like it doesn't seem like a lot, but at the time it was a lot for us to commit to. But we started where we could start. And what that really affirmed for me is that if it could work for me from where we started, it could almost work for anybody.
That's good, Nate. I'm gonna add one piece to that, Jesse, and then hit us with any questions you'd love. But if I could go back and recoach myself again, because I get to share this often with our members. I had 2 or 3 conversations a day with members, and Nelson emphasized in that little short 92-page book, Becoming Your Own Banker, that you held up earlier. First sentence in the book is that it's a workbook. It is not a book you read once. It's something you go through over and over and over again. And Nate and I forget that sometimes. And we have to remember why it's a workbook. It's a workbook because Nelson was encouraged to put on paper what he used to do in person only because the message was starting to spread. And so therefore, anytime I'm meeting with a young couple today, we brought the workbook back out. And I said, what's your thinking right now? How are you thinking about your thinking? What is creating friction that you are discussing? And lo and behold, I'm being tongue in cheek, we could find a point in the workbook to reposition our thinking. And it reminds me that this is about how one thinks. It's about creativity and imagination. And when people talk about money, myself included, being the break, as Nate said so well, it's hard to think outside of a box that you thought you had to live in. Like it's very hard to get outside that box and go, this is actually better for me, better for my family, better for the things I'm trying to accomplish with the same amount of energy. That's a key piece. And that's where, Jesse, in our few conversations and me listening to your stuff, people always ask, well, I'll just go down to my local agent and get this stuff. No, you won't. 99.9% of the time. And that's not a knock on a local agent because I have lots of dear friends that are in the insurance world. You need somebody who's living it. So I always get asked, Nate gets asked, hey, what's your best recommendation if I want to work with somebody in person? Find somebody locally that not only says they're living IBC and Becoming Your Own Banker, but can show you and has the heart of a teacher.
Yeah.
And that'll go a long ways.
Well, and I mean, obviously, we're always going to point people back to the Authorized Practitioner program, but we tell people, look, if you're searching for someone that's not us to work with, make sure they're an authorized practitioner through the Nelson Nash Institute. I think that's really important because we go through some specialized training to make sure we're teaching the concept the way it was intended to be taught, and they put their stamp of approval on us. But also make sure that whoever you're working with, to piggyback off what Brandon said, make sure they're practicing the concept. Because if they're not practicing the concept themselves, how are they going to teach you?
Mm. So now you got Jesse. You did a great job of giving us some leeway to bounce off of each other because this is what we do every day. So like when he gets me fired up, I start going. So if you ever need to butt in and be like, but I want to know this, guys.
I just keep writing my questions down. It's fine.
Okay. So as Nate says that, I'm reminded of something that's so important. A lot of times when I would listen to these podcasts early on, and this was in 17, 18, when there wasn't near as many options as there are today, even though it's still a small amount, everything often sounded hunky-dory depending on who I was listening to, like it was easy. And when we got to meet our mentors in person and they coached us, they were very transparent. And that's another thing I love about this community as a whole. People want to help you as much as you want to help yourself. And that's not the norm in all business circles, first of all.
They probably want to help you more than you want to help yourself, actually.
Bingo.
I mean, I've met those kinds of people. I'm not trying to contradict what you're saying. I've met those kinds of people who they're ready to run while you're still jogging or walking.
Yes. Yes. And you just segued that perfectly for me. A great indicator of the quality of people that we are hanging out with, that we're learning, are those who call us up to a version of ourselves that they see that we don't yet. And our mentors did that for us. They still do that to us, Nate. I mean, if you think about it, the things they say to us sometimes, it's an
Well,
accountability piece.
and there's a great story related to that I've used often. And it's the story of Gideon in the Bible, where the Lord shows up. He's down in the cellar, so to speak, and he's trying to hide what they have from the Philistines.
Mm.
And the Lord shows up and he says, Gideon, mighty valiant warrior. And Gideon goes, what? Like, I'm the youngest. Like, I'm not anything. And you need people in your life that can call things up out of you that you can't see in yourself.
Yep. My people perish for a lack of a vision is just the one that jumps into my mind there. And I say it because it is in Nelson's book. Nelson says that. So, yes.
Jesse, you also, Nelson, the last chapter, if I'm not mistaken, in Building Your Warehouse of Wealth is just about the Israelites. And how many times did they perish because they took their eyes off the Lord and they tried to start doing their own thing? So Nate and I were talking about this earlier this week, because we have the privilege of being around other men who are, iron sharpening iron, or attempting to, by just showing up consistently in certain places, in certain conversations, and letting your values push through your priorities that show up on your calendar. And so I was reminded that when Moses spoke to the Israelites before they were going to the promised land, in our Bible today, it was 30 something chapters of conversation about preparing their hearts and their minds for going into a land that would have abundance. Because when Nate and I start having success, it is super, super easy for us to start saying, look what we did. We may not say it out loud, but our chest will start poking out. We'll start strutting around like a banty rooster, what they say here in East Texas. And we'll start acting like we got it all figured out. And the reality is that's not what this life is about. And so that reminder of that, and what you just said about perishing, it really is that simple. And that's where, when we've gotten away from Nelson's message on occasion, because it has happened, we've been reminded of how sound his principles were, that are grounded in things that are eternal, that not necessarily just transactional.
All right. So I was just going to tell everybody real quick, if you don't have quality people in your life, like what these fellows have been talking about, I mean, the kind of people that could say something about sticking your chest out like a banty rooster, then you need to be more cultured. Okay. You need people like Brandon in your life. We say that here in North Carolina, just so you know. So I know exactly what you're talking about. So
Good.
If you don't know, well, you're welcome.
You might hear Brandon say Katie barred the door at some point too.
And if you don't know that, you need to watch more John Wayne movies.
That's right. That's right.
Hey, I just found out, I didn't realize this. This might be common knowledge for most people, but John Wayne was his stage name. His real name was like Maurice Morrison or something like that. And he played football at USC. Anyways, I thought that was interesting. But
That is interesting.
so, what Brandon was saying, I just got to share this with a new client that I'm working with, new member, and there is so much power in being able to share your failures. I mean, it's awesome to be able to share your successes with people, but the real transformation takes place when you can share your failures. And Brandon said we've gotten away from Nelson's principles from time to time. Yeah, we absolutely have. And we tell people that. We tell people we show up onto these calls with a lot of humility because we haven't always done it the right way.
Mm.
but Lord willing, we are getting so much better at it. We are getting so much better at it. And so Nelson's principles are something that are at the forefront of the things that we do today, but also something that a framework for decision making that we have adopted for ourselves, that we share when it makes sense in the conversation, um, is really four questions. And so anytime we have decisions that we need to make, we run it through that framework. And what it does is it keeps us in alignment with who we are. Now that we know who we are, we know what we don't want to be, we know what we don't want to do. So these four questions, the first one is it pleasing to the Lord? So we have to work through that together. Is it pleasing to the Lord? And if the answer is no, then that's it. We don't even go any further than that. But if we are in agreement that we do feel like this would be pleasing to the Lord, the next question is, what is the best case scenario that can come out of this? So we talk through that. And then the third question is, what is the worst case scenario? And we work through that. And then the last question is, can we live with the worst case scenario? And what that has caused us to be able to do is say no a lot more than we have in the past. Because Jesse, being in this world that we're in, you know that opportunities get thrown at us all the time. But if they're not in alignment with who we are, then that opportunity is probably going to come with a price tag one day.
Yeah, lots of things that are titled an opportunity are not an opportunity anyway, also. Or at least maybe not for, every individual, every time, in every season, et cetera. All right, allow me to shotgun some things back to y'all then, because I want to touch on several things that y'all brought up. One is when y'all were talking about, Brandon, you were saying this. You were talking about the things that wives come up with or their perspective. I'll put a plug out here. I knew I wanted to do this. I've got an episode in our roundtable series titled "The Virtuous Woman." I knew for years, right at 2 years, that I wanted to field a conversation around Proverbs 31. Didn't necessarily know how I was going to do it. Now, I'm a husband, I'm a son, I'm a father of a girl. I can speak to these things, right? But I also wanted perspective. But because of the community that we're around, I'm around a lot of incredible ladies who implement the concept, but also that are practitioners and that do this professionally. So it is really good. So I'll say that. But I'm also saying, by mentioning that, I think there ought to be a part two. So what you were bringing up, Brandon, I want to ask. It's like, okay, well, what was said? And, what did that look like? And, I've gone as far as record an interview with my wife, because even just for my own children's sake and grandchildren, I knew that I wanted to capture a conversation between me and my wife about our journey so that I could get her perspective and have it for them. But of course, I share it with clients and prospective clients, because I can't say enough about how valuable, how important it is for me to have that aspect of my life right, my marriage, right? And I'm 100%, I'll touch on a second one here with Nelson's principles. I love how you were saying earlier about, am I thinking long range in my marriage? Because that's a good question to ask, Is me being mad about whatever right now, is that really me thinking long range, right? And then you used the words energy was one that stuck out to me when you're talking about capitalizing into your marriage. Energy, time, affection. There's a lot that could go into just using Nelson's principles as fathers, as husbands, as, don't do business with banks. Keep things in-house. How in-house am I in my marriage? How in-house am I in my fatherhood, right? Am I outsourcing my fatherhood to somebody? So, these are things that when y'all bring them up, I'm very excited about. And I think it's a great way to look at life in general using Nelson's principles.
Rethink your thinking. Don't be afraid to take on the perspective of how your wife is viewing something. your spouse is viewing something. So,
Well, hold on, Nate. You're assuming
yeah.
that I don't always take my wife's opinion easily. Hold on now. No, you're exactly right, Nate. How many times have we realized through accountability that when Nate calls me up about something going on, even we may not share every little detail, but we know each other close enough to know that we're needing to be praying for each other and things like that. And it just proves that Scripture is so always true and always living. Because when your brother in Christ says it, what are you gonna do? Because he ain't saying it for any other reason than to call you up to be the best husband you can be. Which a lot of times means that I just got to shut my mouth and listen. And I don't do that well all the time. That's been a growing process over my entire marriage.
And we do that to each other from time to time. We'll hit each
Yep.
other with a powerful question. And, I know on multiple occasions, I'm be like, why are you hitting me with all this truth right now? I just want
Yeah.
to vent a little bit,
Yeah.
You ain't got to hit me with this truth.
Yeah.
But at the
Yeah.
same time, it's so appreciative. And I'm incredibly grateful that we get the chance to not only do this, but do it together.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. So that's the other thing that I wanted to go back to, fellas, is when you said what you did, Brandon, about it matters what time you get up in the morning. I have my views. I have my perspectives. I also know what my habits are. I'm much more likely. It's much easier for me to stay up late and do things then, even like work, like doing stuff. But I as well have learned that beyond just being able to see the sunrise, which I've seen more sunsets than sunrises so far in my life. I bet you. I'm certain. I feel confident in saying that. I don't know that I'll necessarily let that be the case. All right, if God will give me more years, but one thing that I did in that area because I decided it was important. I might even have shared this with you when we were up in Cincinnati, Brandon. Was I called up a handful of guys that I had been developing intentional relationships where we could talk about finances, marriage, fatherhood, fitness, these things that are important to me and them. We're aligned, right? And I said, hey, what days of the week could we have a phone call in the morning? Because I know me. It's hard to get, I don't want to get up in the morning. It's easy to stay up late, harder to get up in the morning. But I know, hey, if I'm going to have a conversation with Brandon, with Joe, with Rob, if I'm going to have a conversation with one of my buddies, I'm going to be on time. All right, for them, because they're going to be on the phone. They're going to be waiting on me. Ain't no way I'm having them get up at, before the sun's up, and then I leave them hanging while I'm in bed, right? Can't do that. So it's just something that I put in place because it's helpful to me, and I do look forward to it. And I've had so many great times now, so many great conversations. So I'm just trying to say that to encourage other people to consider these things. These principles are good. These ideas are so good. Another one is, when y'all were talking earlier about, Nate, you said, you're not going to go to the box store agent at the box store insurance company and get what you're looking for if you're interested in infinite banking. It's not going to happen, okay? That's like walking into an ER when you need a brain surgeon. The ER is going to get you an antibiotic or something and get you out the door, okay? Y'all might know a bit better. I know that there are a few hundred IBC practitioners, and this is coming from somebody too. I'll go ahead and temper what I'm getting ready to say by saying I was licensed in 2019, fellas. So for years, I was not an IBC authorized practitioner, but I specifically went out and got my license so I could work directly with people to implement what I'd already been doing for years myself, right? So I'm recently into the fold, okay? 2025. So, 6 years or so of operating as a guy who, I've implemented IBC. So give me some grace, but I'm also just trying to be honest here. You're not going to get that by going to the box store. There are a few hundred of us so far, and interesting to think that it started with one man, Nelson himself. That's like one infinite banking authorized practitioner per 1 million Americans. Just rough math here, okay? But few hundred to a few 100 million people here in America. So if you think you're going to go to a box store and get IBC, you rethink it. That's what I'm saying there.
Well,
That's
if
good.
you compare the number of financial professionals across the country versus authorized practitioners, we are like 0.05% of the financial world when it comes to the things that we know and understand. It's
Yeah,
like unbelievably low.
Nate, I was texting with our buddy Ryan Griggs this morning and just telling him Happy New Year and catching up with him real quick and seeing how he's doing. And it reminded me of what you guys just said of something he said, I think last year at the think tank, where he basically made the point because Ryan can be very point pointed and poignant at the same time. And he's like, yeah, I went into a profession where everybody thinks I'm lying and try to scam them out of their money because I don't believe in it. This is the reality of like, and anybody listening for the first time, this is how you can tell we host a podcast also. If you're just catching that and you have no context, that's a hard thing to process. What is Brandon really talking about? Well, if you read Becoming Your Own Banker, we'll send you right back to Becoming Your Own Banker. You'll see in there that Nelson talks about through all of his work that most people's understanding of dividend paying whole life insurance, which is what this is about, page 3, is based off of someone else's misunderstanding, half understanding, and on a rare, sad occasion, ball face lie.
To include Dave Ramsey.
Not very common. I mean, and so, and the reality with that and this whole deal of accountability is here's something that Nate and I are learning over and over again. It does not matter what we know at all. It doesn't matter. Nate and I know why we live what we live, how we live it, where we fail, how this is still better when we do fail, because we're going to, when life doesn't go the way we planned. But the first piece is does that other person know that there's something worth exploring that's different than what they've been doing? And we got to get to that quick. That's got to be known before anything else, or we're going to waste a lot of air and energy.
Yeah, we like to say this chose us. We didn't choose it. And, if I think to where we are now and I flash back, going all the way back to high school, me and Brandon spent a lot of time together in high school because we were great friends. And we never had a conversation about one day being business owners and business partners. And, I mean, we couldn't have chosen this for ourselves. Going back to what Brandon said at the beginning, this was all the Lord just working through our relationships and orchestrating these things. And, that is, man, what a privilege to be able to just know confidently that we are operating through and walking through the doors that he has opened for us. Because we can't look back on especially the last 3 or 4 years and say God hasn't been in this, because he has given us the opportunity to lead people to Jesus through this business, and help heal marriages through the things that we teach, and the ability to empower others and promote this idea that you were created for more. The encouragement that we get to bring to people in operating in their purpose is just like, man, I mean, it's just it's an honor that we get to be invited into people's stories.
Yeah, I hadn't even released it yet. I recorded a short on my phone the other day after I got a text message from somebody who said, no, they said it in person to me in our first phone conversation. Man, you're an answer to prayer. That's a hard thing to receive in a way. For me, it's a great blessing. I mean, my goodness, somebody's saying, hey, I've been praying on how to improve this financial. And you can read about Nelson. He's talking in the book right there about what he did. It's like the quality of my prayer life, improved because of these hard things that happen, So we do talk with people that are dealing with hard things. And when somebody says, you or this is an answer to my prayer, it's a great thing. It's also it's a hard thing to receive. But, my counter to that too would be, if we think that, we just got to know that the enemy wants us to be downtrodden. The enemy wants to tamp us down as often as possible. It's kind of like that thing of, well, you don't have to think so highly of yourself, but, how's that saying go? Not thinking less of yourself, but think less of yourself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
I don't know.
I'm with you.
I've said this before. The enemy is a long-term thinker, and you're not going to overcome the enemy's long-term thinking with your short-term thinking. You're going to have to think long-term too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's one of the, and I love that point about that's a hard thing to receive, because if we think about receiving it in our human flesh, well, that's scary because we know we can't handle it. It's not ours to handle and carry. It's got to be carried by something way bigger than us, way more outside of our realm. And so when we hear those things, one thing that Nate and I have practically been convicted to think through over the last several years, when we fail and when we struggle and when we get selfish, all these things that happen, is to remember that it's all God's.
Mm-hmm.
And to remember, Nate says this often, that if we will continue to lean into being as selfless as possible, where he gets all the glory, and our work that he's given us the ability to do is as much worship as anything else we do, then he takes care of the birds of the air just fine day by day. We're going to be fine.
Yep. Doing work that matters and doing it well is a great reflection on the Creator who's made all this possible. The second half of what I said in that short, that I'll release, is I know that I do work that matters. But what's great about it is because I do life-changing work because people are ready to change their lives. That's the other side of the coin. I mean, it's all because the Lord allowed it to be so. But I do life-changing work because people get on my calendar that are ready to change their lives. They're ready to become their own banker. I'll tell you what, I've got working notes on an episode that I'm looking forward to recording soon about my failures. I've implemented the concept for over a decade now, and I'm going to do a special episode about that, Decade of IBC. I'm looking forward to it. And again, it's for my own kids, it's for my grandchildren, but I'm trying to be an open book for clients and prospective clients as well, too. But then I came to terms with, I also believe what you guys have brought up about failures are as important, or probably more important to mention, than the successes. And we've had successes, and, those are fun to talk about. But this list of failures, fellas, it just keeps getting longer as I'm writing out the notes for this episode.
Raise your hand if you've been guilty of chasing a rate of return in the last 8 years.
Right. Yes.
Oh, gosh.
Yes.
Raise your hand if you lost money chasing a rate of return in the last 8 years.
While teaching Nelson's sound principles that teach against that logically. Yeah.
So let me do this.
Go ahead, Jesse.
No, you had something.
Okay. Well, you said something real quick that I love, that is going to pair to what you said. You said two sides of the coin. And it's one of the greatest teaching analogies that we use for my brain to simplify things. And it's from coaching and mentoring. All right. So we went from not even fathoming paying anybody to coach us in anything to being one of our higher line items in our spend account each year for coaching. And one of our coaches that we worked with for a while said, everybody shows up to these conversations with the best present day thinking they have. So we have to show up with the humility that matches that. So that's the first piece. The other piece is that we have been, I'm hesitant to use the word conditioned, but I think it's a fitting word here. We have been conditioned to believe that in the world of money, there's only a heads and a tails, two sides to every coin. There's, you save up cash to pay for things, or you go to the bank and you get financing. But there is an edge on that coin, and it makes up a very small percentage. But when you learn how to get it on its edge, it will move faster, more efficiently, and in the direction that you want it to go, if you know how to make it do that, if you know that edge is there. And that's where you were asking about, I'll share this little side story. How did my wife, Leah, get the final peace of mind other than she was going to kill me if I didn't quit talking about IBC? So she just gave it to the Lord. That's what she would tell you. But unbeknownst to me, she watches Nate do his little 2.5 minute video on cash versus finance, which is what I just described with the coin and how IBC solves for being a great saver and the need for financing. And she says, all you had to do was show me that. That's what she tells every wife. Minute to minute and a half. It's that simple. You were saving your money somewhere. You were exerting your energy with your dollars somewhere. This is just a different location that has better rules made for you. That's
Right.
how she got at peace with that.
A prophet's not without honor in his own country, right? Just send him somebody else's information.
Absolutely.
Me and Brandon have talked about this before. If we can teach someone by drawing it on a napkin, then we've done a good job of simplifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jesse, completely transparent, I struggle with simplifying. And so because I know why I do this now, so I like to dig in. But it's not always time to dig in. We have to meet people where they're at. So, we have to, the way we meet people where they're at is we listen more than we talk. And we listen to learn, not listen to respond. And that's two very different things that I found that when I listen to learn, Nelson's principles connect to anything they're dealing with. Anything. And that's way easier to meet them where they're at than me listen to respond, because then I'm trying to tell them what I know instead of hearing what they are trying to fix, what problem they have that they're trying to solve. And Nelson's book already does that very easily once you read it a couple times.
When I've shared this before, Nelson's book was such a gift for us, not only for us personally, but us as practitioners, because we don't have to reinvent anything. We can just point people back to the book, and his wisdom just shines through on those pages. And so we don't have to pretend we're wise in this area of XYZ. We just lean on Nelson's wisdom, and we can share our experiences by doing the same thing. But we didn't create this. We were just fortunate enough to be involved in what Nelson discovered.
That's good, Nate. Yeah, if I could go back and tell myself anything, just because I know if your media is similar to ours, early on and often we have other practitioners or interested practitioners listening a lot. It seems to happen on our side quite a bit. I'd go back and say, don't ever get in a conversation with someone about IBC, no matter how much you believe you understand it and live it, without a copy of one of Nelson's books sitting beside you, preferably becoming your own banker. But I always like to have Warehouse of Wealth and Case for IBC on my desk or close to my desk, knowing who I'm visiting with, if I know them well. And I'll go, hey, you got your copy of such and such with you? And if I know the question ahead of time, which I like to, before we get on our call or our scheduled meeting, I'll challenge them to tell me the one thing they're trying to think through or rethink their thinking, a problem they're trying to solve. And if our team or I get to it ahead of time, we'll send them a page or pages of one of Nelson's books to be reminded of what started them on this journey to begin with. Because that's oftentimes where we get off track, as we go back to that pathway in our brain that was always the way we did everything with money. And so that neurological path, we slip back into it very easily. And that's for anything in life, not just money. It takes a lot of energy and effort to change a system of behaviors that you think are normal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that if you can't explain something to a child, then you don't know it well enough. And that's a sobering thought. That's a sobering challenge. But I mention that because of what you're bringing up. But also, my encouragement to people would be, if you're already a client, you're already implementing this concept intentionally, because it's an effort. It's like those accountability conversations with a buddy. If you're either going to have them or you're not going to have them. But having intentional conversations with my children is really important, and it's about whatever, right? Like I could be holding hands with my daughter. We're walking around my property while I take a 10-minute walk from work, taking a break, stretching out. Maybe we'll go throw tomahawks, at our tomahawk throwing station
I
on our
love it.
property or whatever. But she'll be talking to me about marriage, fellas. My six, and she'd have been 5 at the time that I'm thinking of, asked me, Daddy, how do I know that it's a good husband? Or, well, just ask Daddy, baby. Of course, just ask Daddy. Daddy will tell you whether he is or not. But
You make sure and introduce him to me as soon as possible.
exactly, but yeah, he can't talk to you unless he talks to me first. That's how that's going to be.
I have had conversations with my daughter about, part of my job as your dad is to protect you. And if you will let me, I will protect you.
Hmm.
And she said, okay, because it was on the topic of dating and things like that. And I said, if you will, if you will let me, I will do everything I can to protect you.
Mm-hmm. I love it. I think we should take advantage of those opportune moments, like I was describing, walking around the property with my daughter. But also, I was trying to say intentional time spent talking. Because I don't know about y'all, and I was trying to ask this kind of stuff. Where was your mindset? What was your background? Whatever. I didn't have intentional conversations with anybody about money. I didn't have intentional conversations with anybody about marriage before I got married. Now I had some quality people in my life said, pray early. Start praying for a good wife now. And I did that. Lord bless me. That worked out real good, right? But intentional conversations. And as far as, our level of understanding, the saying goes that when one teaches, 2 people learn, right? If we're having intentional conversations with our own family, which is where I believe we ought to start. Of course, we're having intentional conversations with our clients, right? That we're servicing and that we're walking this journey with. But if we'll have intentional conversations and if we'll do it in a way that, it could be drawn out on a napkin and a child could understand it, that's the place to start is what I'm trying to say there. And I've even gone so far as to try and video some things with my family. We'll video family meetings, and that'll just be for us. That'll just be in-house. I've also recorded conversations with my children and released it on the channel because I'm trying to see where they're at. I'm trying to take that opportunity to plant a seed about something, whatever it is. Our boys are old enough to be earning money now, and they got goals and plans and questions. And, I'm recording that kind of stuff. I've got a family banking series on my channel where, over these upcoming years, I hope to fill that thing up, just by being an open book and being an example. So, man, we need to have more conversations, Nate. I need to have these kinds of conversations about these daughters and marriage and all this kind of stuff. Y'all, I got questions about your journey. Yeah, one that I know burns in me is, and maybe especially because of y'all's Dave Ramsey background, what were the sticking points that were the last holdouts for you to decide, I'm going to transition into intentionally paying significant premiums into that, whole life insurance policy that Lucifer brought to the world, I guess, according to Dave Ramsey. What did you last have to work through? What helped you do infinite banking? Actually go and do the thing for yourself.
I know for us, a part of the process that Life Success and Legacy took us through that we tried to emulate with our own, kind of angles and experience is once we were approved for insurance with the insurance company, that's kind of how we were thinking then, even though we had a better understanding. My wife and I got on a call with Chris Bay, Zoom, where we could see each other, and this was probably 2018. And one of the things that I reflect back on the most is if I had it to do over again. So husbands, if you're the one who comes to this and you are like gung ho, and if you're a quick start like Nate and your wife's, not a quick start and she wants to think through it and be sure everything's safe and secure, I would get really good at inviting your spouse to come along on this journey with you, because it will be a journey of the questions will never stop. Maybe she'll get more comfortable with it. And in a lot of cases, the wife is not as daily engaged, but she is aware and fully supports. And sometimes it's the other way around, depending on, dynamics. But if I would have invited my wife along, Chris wouldn't have had to do as much as he did. And he was so exceptional at asking questions that what he helped us realize is we can do what we're already doing, keep more of the money we're working hard to earn, protect it with a lifelong long range thinking process, and be able to reuse it for the things that matter to us anyway. All the things we were already trying to do could be done more efficiently, more certainty, more control, more liquidity with long range thinking by implementing this. But we had to see what we were already doing to compare it to what we could be doing with IBC and know how to with good coaching and realize, oh, these are just the things that are changing and it's really not that big a deal. That's what I remember the most is that shift of, okay, this makes sense, but how does it make sense for us? Theory to reality. And having a great coach was at the top of the list besides reading the book over and over again.
Okay, having spouse on board, being on the same page, walking the journey together, and having a quality mentor. All right. What about for you and your experience, Nate?
There's this story about this guy who walks into a bar, and he walks up to the bar, and there's this dog over in the corner that's kind of whimpering, and he notices every time the dog kind of gets up and repositions himself, he's whimpering. And so he asked the bartender, he said, "What is wrong with that dog?" And he said, "Well, he loves that spot over there in the corner, but there's a nail that's actually sticking up out of the floor." And the guy says, "Well, why didn't the dog just move?" And he said, "Because it doesn't hurt bad enough yet." And the reality is, a lot of the change that takes place in our life is because we finally experienced enough pain to do something different. And for me, and what I was going through, yes, I had gotten away from all the financial peace stuff, because we had gotten into some debt, and then like I said, also just some life things that happened, losing my dad and inheriting a business that I wasn't ready for. There's a whole nother story there. Um, but I also recognize that the money that I had set aside following Dave, the money that I had sitting there in mutual funds was not creating any value for me right now where I needed value injected back into my life. And when I sat down and I ran the numbers on the debt snowball of getting out of this nightmare that I was in, it seemed extremely daunting. And I was just thinking, there's got to be a better way. I didn't know what it was, but I just had this feeling that there had to be a better way to do this, to get out of this nightmare that I felt like I was in. And so for me, the thing that I remember the most is just the pain that I was experiencing enough to do something different. Um, and I will absolutely echo what Brandon said about inviting your wife along in the journey, because just like him, me going to my wife and saying, not only do I want to abandon, I mean, I remember her whenever I brought up whole life insurance, she was like, "But Dave says whole life insurance is terrible." Like, I don't know how many men across America have ever heard, "But Dave says," um, but but I heard it, but Dave says this or whatever. And and I would try to answer her questions at that time the best way that I could. But then I would get to the point where I was stumped because I didn't know enough at that point. And she would just say, "If you can't answer that question, why are we even considering this?" And so fortunately, Chris Bay was really great about walking that journey with both of us, where I did not have to be the expert. He was the expert, and I was just the student that was learning at the time. And um, I remember when Chris mapped out a plan with our numbers that showed us getting out of debt much faster than what I had put pen to paper on doing the debt snowball. It was eye-opening for both of us. But when she saw our numbers, we got done with that meeting and she just looked at me and she goes, "Okay, this makes too much sense. Why wouldn't we do this?"
Mm.
And I just remember going, "Thank you, Lord. Thank you, Lord." Because there was nothing I could have done or said at that time to get her to that point. It was someone else who was an expert being able to come at it from the perspective of um, not only his experience, but also his knowledge,
Mm.
and us just getting to sit back and be part of that. Um, I mean, people who are practicing IBC always say, I wish I would have started sooner and I wish I would have started with more. That is just a common, common thing that you will hear. Um, but we started with just about as much as we could have started with at that point. And being able to see what it did for us was what gave me so much confidence, as I said earlier, that if it could work for us in our dire situation with not much to work with at the time, or what we felt was not much to work with at the time, then man, how many more people can we go help?
Mm. It's good, Nate. Yeah. What I found more than anything in our conversations we have the privilege of having all the time with people now is it's really the questions that we ask that open up all kinds of possibilities. And we've talked about and we've touched on accountability and iron sharpening iron, but like you said earlier, Jesse, you have to want to be looking for that, because and I'm guilty of this now, small talk. I don't do very well with small talk anymore. Like, how's the weather and da 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 da. And I'm not saying it's not okay. And I'm not saying I would say don't talk small talk with me. But I want to know, Jesse, if I meet you for the first time in the first 5, 10 minutes, I want to know, what do you love about what you do? Because what I'm really trying to get at is do you know you're on this earth for a purpose beyond your own nose? And 90% of conversation is just run of the mill. How's the weather? What was the traffic like? All these things. And I was that. I mean, I still have to fight that. But when you get to have engaging conversation, you're living life intentionally instead of life happening to you. And those are two different ways to live. And you talked about the enemy earlier. The enemy loves for us to drift, to get away from anything that's creating sharpening in our life for the kingdom. And that's why it says it comes to steal, kill, and destroy like a prowling lion, because lions prowl from prey and weakness that leads the pack. So even conversations like this.
Yeah. No, all those things amount to is distraction. And when has distraction ever been beneficial to anyone?
Yeah.
I'll tell you the scripture you made me think of then when you were talking about what I would essentially call desire, Nate, right? The dog, the nail, the pain, right? I thought of the lame man who'd been by the pool for 38 years. Okay, so Jesus tells a story about how there's a lame man, 38 years, by a pool. He's an infirm man, can't get up. He knows he can't, and he knows his situation. Everybody around him knows his situation. Jesus knows his situation. But the first thing Jesus asks the man is, well, do you even want to be better? Do you even want to be whole? Do you want? He has want. So it's like, yeah, if the desire's not there, nothing else matters, right? Like you could have the greatest coaches in the world. You could have this great message. If you could become your own banker, but if the desire's not there, we're not having a conversation. There's nothing going on here. Well, I had a debt trajectory with Infinite Banking, and I talked to a good number of my clients that are in that situation. It's just the average situation of most Americans. There's something so beautiful when you can wrap your mind around the idea of not only can I pay off debt and do it probably quicker than I think I could and definitely more efficiently, but then me and my wife will actually have something to show for it more than just erasing the bad debt. We'll actually have built something. I mean, let alone, the knowledge and your experience and your ability as a person being a banker, now thinking like a banker. That's so important. That's so huge. But no, tactically, actually, you would have appreciating assets, right? With these guaranteed numbers that, I know for me, my wife, she is very happy to see our net worth, to see our death benefits increasing every year. That protection, that level of protection for our family, that matters to her. She likes seeing that. She's liked that part from the start. Oh, we can have a guaranteed protection for our children. Beautiful. That part makes sense. Now we can also use this thing to, not just pay off the debt, but have assets to show for it at the same time. It's really good. Listen, I want to give you guys time. If you got something burning, I'm going to want you to put it out there. I got a couple of key questions I feel like. I want you to be able to share your contact information. Could y'all tell me some ways that you've used policies personally before? Anything that you'd like to share? Have you used policies in your life?
I'll share the first thing I ever did, which is I thought was the craziest thing ever with money. Okay. Then 8 years ago, I started my first policy, my wife and I do. And because we're Dave Ramsey, die hard, all we want to do is get rid of the only debt we have, which is the house. Okay. So we start studying about making a principal payment with our first policy loan and seeing how fast we can pay off the policy loan and, expand our system and those kind of things. Well, as I'm doing that, we learn about something called recasting, which not everybody knows what recasting is. It's not refinancing, but a lot of mortgage companies will allow you to, if you'll pay 10%, 20% down on the total balance up front, they will take that new balance and divide it by your remaining months. Doesn't cost anything extra, but it lowers your monthly payment and it frees up cash flow. So we did that the first year and a half or so. And that was on a very, to what Nate and I would say now, small policy, but then it was as big as we could start with. And so the practice of taking over the banking function reiterated right then that Nelson said, this is about how one finances the things of life. The process of banking will go on forever. Period. It happens. It doesn't matter what medium of exchange it is, whether it's a dollar bill or something else, that process will always go on. And from then on, it began to open up doors. And some of those doors opened up and I shouldn't have walked through them. But it still, 8 years later, brings me back to Nelson's principles of thinking long range, not being afraid to capitalize, don't steal the peas. And I think of don't steal the peas as relationship capital. If you're not willing to give as much as you're asking for, you probably don't need to be asking in relationships. And so we think more covenantal now instead of contractual. So that's early on where I started. Now, I'll let Nate tell you what came to his mind.
Yeah, the first big thing that we did, aside from just shifting some wind current on some debt right out of the gate, the first big thing that we did was in 2020, my wife and I decided that we wanted to find some land. And we were looking for 5 acres, really. And we found out she had a teacher friend of hers that she worked with who said, "Hey, we're actually selling some land right now." And so we go to look at it, and we ride out in a side by side to get to it, and it's an 11 acre. No, wait, is that right? No, it's a like a 13 acre spot. Um, and there's some trees, but it's cleared for the most part. There's tree, but just a beautiful piece of property. And I'm just like daydreaming about this property at this point, walking around just looking at it, going, "Yeah, I could absolutely live here." And he said, the only downside to this particular tract of land that they had for sale is there was no road access. So in order to get the 13 acres, he knew what he was doing when he brought us out there. You got to get the 11 acres in front of it. And so all of a sudden we went from wanting to buy 5 acres to now the opportunity to potentially buy 24 acres that we were not really prepared for at the time. Um, but because for the last couple of years we've been funding our policy, we had enough in our policy for the down payment on that 24 acres.
Hmm.
And so we were able to make a decision pretty quickly that yeah, we're gonna purchase because if you know anything about land purchasing land, they want at least 20% down. And so they were like, or we told them, yeah, we're gonna go ahead and buy this, and we ended up, because of the deal that we got on it, because they were really actually selling it under market a little bit. When the land was finally appraised, we actually had instant equity on the deal right out of the gate, which was pretty cool. It wasn't a ton, but it was more than what we paid for.
Mm.
Um, but we secured the deal with the policy loan. That's how we were able to get it and get it done pretty quickly. I'd never bought land before. I bought houses before, but I'd never bought land before, and I didn't realize how quickly you could close on land. Because you don't have to go send a home inspector out there and you don't get the whatever. And so I think we may have closed on that land in probably 10 days or so, and it was a done deal. And I still own that land, but life changed for us. Again, things that were just completely out of our control that we didn't necessarily see coming, but life changed for us to the point where last year we made the decision that we were actually going to sell that land. And if we ever decided to buy more land in the future, we could do that. But when I started looking at the appreciation of that property over the last 5 years, it has more than doubled what we paid for it. Well, we secured it with our policy loan from our policy. So if I add up the amount of money that I actually have in it, that what I would call my own money, I have very little of my own money in the deal because I used so much of the insurance company's money to secure it to begin with. So when we do sell that property, if we're just looking at the pure return on my money, it's like a 10x return or something like that.
Mm.
And so when
So
you're using someone else's money to create value in your life, the rate of return has a far greater impact than when you're putting your own money at risk. And we get to use the insurance company's money to create value in our life.
mm, it's good, Nate. Yeah, that piece about becoming your own banker early on scared me a lot because it doesn't matter how you dice it when you hear banker, like that's a hard word to get through because, depending on your age, a banker was either somebody you always saw when you went and got a withdrawal or deposit, depending on how old you are, or a banker is an online banking system if you're younger, and neither one of those things are really true. And so I think one of the privileges that we have, back to the napkin example, is let's really get clear on what words mean. And one thing I really appreciate about Ryan Griggs is he is a fanatic on what Nelson was emphatic about with words. Words matter. Don't believe me? Forget somebody's name. Forget somebody's name that matters. And thank goodness Nate remembers names way better than I do. I can tell he's going to say that, so I'm going to say it now. Nate is the name. He can remember where we met somebody, what their first name is, who their kids were. It's amazing. I have to work at it, but our names matter. Words matter. So when I think about that, I look back and I go, Jesse, Nate Nelson was so wise, and our mentors taught us this, that the most profitable business we can be in is banking. So for a real estate mogul out there, construction mogul, even a personal household, those are all businesses, no matter how you dice it. And you are doing the things of that business and that life, but you're really in the banking business. And if you're not, someone's taking advantage of you because of the banking business, and they are benefiting from it. So we have a client recently, reminds me of the equipment finance example, got all kinds of equipment. And when he read the equipment finance example, he goes to a lot of our in-person meetups. He's like, it just makes him sick. So we started doing something about it. But what he's also said is, and I've realized this in our conversations because of how he wants to rethink his thinking, he's going to be in the construction business, but the better banker he becomes, the more stable the construction business becomes. So he's really doing banking with the construction business. And that is a way different way to look at life than I'm trying to do construction through somebody else's banking system, and I keep riding these peaks and valleys because I'm not in control of that process.
When
So that's an
businesses
exciting thing.
operate off of margin, we all operate off of margin as business owners. Well, what is the goal of a business owner? To be as efficient as you possibly can in what you're doing. So if you can create more margin for yourself inside of your business, what is the downside to that?
Mm.
Yeah, I don't care if you're the struggling average American, or if you're a thriving business owner, when you are aware of how well the banks are living off of you, no matter which scenario you're giving them, they're living well off of you. You're drowning in debt, or you're thriving as a business owner and you're putting all your capital there, all your direct deposits there. It will make you sick, like your fellow Brendan. Listen, I got to do this because we're crunched for time. I wish we could keep going, but let me know, let people hear, because y'all are professionals in this space. Y'all are incredible folks. Y'all are actually mentors of mentors in this space. I'm really appreciative of having you here and having you in my life, having these conversations. Where can folks best reach y'all?
Go ahead, Nate.
As far as social media presence, I would say these days we probably are spending more time on Facebook than anywhere else as far as that goes. You can also go to our website, unlimitedlifeconcepts.com. There's a contact place there. You can send us an email. So our website is unlimitedlifeconcepts.com, but if you want to put a Nate at in front of that, you can get me. If you want to put a Brandon at in front of that, you can get Brandon.
Awesome. And I'll make sure to put that down in the description below, but I wanted to verbally capture it here if you wanted to be able to put it out there. I'm going to pivot unless there's anything you guys knew that you wanted to put out there for folks. I'm going to give you that minute. Please say anything that sticks out to you, but I'm going to have to transition to some rapid fire questions next.
I'm ready for rapid fire.
Let's go. All right. Recent favorite book or podcast?
Willpower Doesn't Work. Dr. Benjamin Hardy, the best book I've read in the last 5 years.
The Faith-Driven Entrepreneur is one that's really hit for me recently. Faith-Driven Entrepreneur book. Recent podcast. It's actually not a podcast, but a video series that I've been listening to, but it doesn't have anything to do with infinite banking or anything like that. It's just
Run it by me.
well, there's a pastor. He actually passed away back in 2013. His name was Dr. Kelly Nelson Burks, and I just came across his channel recently, and some of the stuff that he teaches is just fascinating. It's like so many other things in the financial world that we talk about and teach. It's just a different perspective than I've heard on some biblical topics, and I just find it pretty interesting.
I love talking Bible. You'll have to talk to me some about that then.
Heck yeah.
How about, is there a hidden talent that people may not know that you have?
Go ahead, Nate.
Hidden talent.
Most people don't know what I'm thinking about you.
Well, okay, so I actually went to school. I went to college for 3 years on a choir scholarship.
So you got pipes.
And he's got pipes.
Something like that. People keep telling me I can sing. I still don't believe them to this day.
With that hairdo, I see it. I see it. You're the lead vocal.
Thank you, Jesse. Lead vocal. You got it.
I'm just I mean, like most people, you're your own worst critic or whatever. So I've always been super critical of myself, and I hear myself sing and I'm like, that doesn't sound very good to me. But apparently other people think it does.
I'm a choir type singer myself. I'll sing in a group. I believe we should give praise to the Lord, but I'll do it in that group setting.
Yeah. Hidden talent for me, I wouldn't call it a hidden talent, but it catches the most people off guard. I play somewhere between 50 and 75 baseball games, wood bat, live baseball across the U.S. and outside the U.S. a year. It's one of my favorite conversation starters outside of talking about Jesus.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. When you mentioned being competitive earlier, I wanted to dig in there and I didn't get to. So that's probably where it gets to show up a little bit. Okay. I love it. All right. I'll leave it up to y'all to say what's a favorite quote and or Bible verse. Love to hear either one of those or both of them.
Psalm 46:10 is relevant for me today. It's been relevant many times in my life, about being still and knowing who we serve and knowing that he will be exalted on this earth as he is in heaven. And a reminder of Psalm 46 is that it was about talking to a group of people who were dealing with disasters and all kinds of calamity and wars and things like that. But it's relevant for us today because there's always chaos, because there's sin in the world, because we had to have a savior who chose to come down and die on the cross for sin. So Psalm 46:10. And then I have so many sayings. My wife's like I'm a walking saying sayer, whatever you want to call it. But I really like we'll suffer one or two pains, the pain of discipline or the pain of regret. Um, Nate always helps me remember, was that Rohn or Ziegler or
Jim Rohn.
Jim
Yeah,
Rohn?
you took
And
mine,
so
but it's all good.
perfect,
You can't go wrong with a Jim Rohn quote.
no doubt.
Um, the the first passage that comes to mind for me is something that over the years as a student minister and also a senior pastor of a church, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, the end of chapter 5 is something that has always shown up in a lot of my messages. Um, and beginning in verse 17, it says, "Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away; behold, the new has come." All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave himself a ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. And then the hard hitter right here, verse 20. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us.
Mm.
And when you recognize that you were designed and created to be a mouthpiece for God's truth and that you are supposed to be an ambassador, um, man, what a weight and what a weight, but also what a privilege that is to take that on, and what an
Hmm.
honor it is to be able to carry that out.
Yep. Two best words anybody can hear are good and faithful. I love it. What's the most impactful thing somebody ever said to you?
Mm. You're going to see how we're an open book. There was a dark period of my life where no matter how I looked, I could only see darkness, even after giving up alcohol and after knowing that I was God's child. And I got in the room with an expert that knew more about what I was dealing with than I did because they were an expert. That's all they did. And she said to me, "You're not crazy. That proves you're normal." And forever, I had been associating this dark place in my head with something being wrong with me, as you said so well earlier, about how the devil really tries to tamp us down. And when he tamps us down so deep into the ground that we can't see straight, we don't know up from down, down from up. And so you'll always hear me encouraging people to get around other people, even if it's not the right fit and you got to try somebody else, that are experts in areas you're not, because we cannot be experts in everything. And that's one of the greatest tricks I think the devil plays on men, is to think that they can do it on their own. They're not successful when they don't do it on their own. They're a failure, and then rinse and repeat, and this vicious cycle starts.
There's so many things that I could say, but one thing, aside from all me and Brandon's conversations, because we say impactful stuff to one another all the time, but something that came to mind, and it's permeated through business and through my spiritual life in the last 4 or 5 years, was getting to do some one-on-one work with Garrett Gunderson. And he asked me a question because I was telling him about, when I work and how I work and all this stuff. And his question, which was a ripple effect into so many other things, was, when do you rest? And I was just like, wow. And so we actually built play/rest into my weekly schedule. And but that permeated not only through business, but I started showing up better for my family. I started showing up better for the Lord. I started honoring the times when the Lord tells us to rest. And it really just brought a new perspective on what rest really meant.
I love it. Sword or hammer?
I want to say sword, but I just don't feel like I'd be comfortable with it because I grew up more with a hammer in my hand, and I'm thinking sledgehammer and get after it. That's where my brain goes.
Okay.
Sword just looked cooler to me.
I agree.
All right.
If there's a sword and a hammer
underwater,
sitting there, I got to grab the sword.
Sorry. Last one. If you could breathe underwater or fly, which would you rather?
Fly for me.
If I could breathe underwater and not have to deal with all the things that are unknown that I could explore, underwater because of how uncertain it is.
Got it. All right, so we're at time. Okay, y'all, I made time. Okay, I'm going to have to say a couple of nice things if y'all are dipping out, and I'll have to record my outro to tell everybody to go contact you. But I did my job. I kept an eye on the time while having this quality conversation. I didn't want to stop. Y'all are free to
awesome,
go.
man.
I'm going to do that, though. Okay,
Appreciate you, man.
Of course. Say a couple of nice things.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It was a joy to be on here and hang out for a little while.
Yep.
Absolutely. I want more. I'm going to connect with y'all. Let's get our schedules together for a round table.
That sounds good, brother. Talk soon, man.
Appreciate you, fellas.
All right, bye.
All right, everybody, that was an absolute pleasure for me to have these guys on, to get to have that conversation. Their contact information will be below in the show notes where you can reach out to Nate and Brandon. You can find me at durhamtalents.com. If you'd like some particular questions fielded when they can join us for a round table, you can put that down in the comments section below. Otherwise, my hope is that you live and leave a lasting legacy.